this is it for now, but I will, I'll finish the project, and hopefully it doesn't take another whole 2 years to do so.
Hopefully it doesn't take another whole 2 years to do so. 2 years.
I'm just gonna live with it. It's fine. I'm gonna wipe it off. Okay, not quite 2 years, but still, some people complete multiple car builds in that amount of time. What do I have? A single carbon spoiler? Well, I've also got this video here. That's the real finished product. The sizzle reel, they call it. Hundreds of hours of work for a 2-minute video that the average viewer will watch for less than 30 seconds. Worth it. But that's not what we're going to talk about here. This here, dear viewer, is the content you've been waiting for. As a connoisseur of fine car internet film, you're not looking for low camera angles and bass-heavy royalty-free music. You want to see the real stuff. You know what I'm talking about. That's right, time lapses. Time lapses of me sanding. Well, strap in because I've got terabytes of this stuff, all shot in glorious GoPro 4K, complete with artifacts, wonky colors, and wide-angle digital lenses. Let's start at the beginning and work our way till today. I will cover the early years as quick as I can. For full details, you can watch the last 2 videos on this project on my channel. Keep in mind, I'm just another guy with an 8.6 BRZ that he wrapped and threw cool wheels on. Only thing that was missing was the big old wing, and I couldn't just have any big old wing. It had to be the big old wing. The project started in house number 1 with 1 garage bay, and at the time the BRZ was my only car. I soon got a green 98 Honda Accord, which I mainly drove while I experimented with foam and fiberglass. The 200,000 mile V6 in the Accord was impressive, and not to mention faster off the line than the BRZ. But as for the spoiler, the result was not so impressive. Yeah. The wrap process also began around this time, though the roof panel would remain the only wrapped part of the car for years. The next version of the plug would be made of plasticine clay, which allowed for much finer control over the details. If you're looking to replicate this or build custom panels at home, I recommend you start here. The process was time-consuming, but ultimately resulted in a much more stable shape. I then coated this with a thin layer of fiberglass, which broke while moving to a new home with a larger 3-car garage, as in the meantime I had accumulated an MR2 and 2 IS300 wagons. I also sold the Honda. After reassembling the broken clay, I coated it in fiberglass once again, and after sanding, painting, and sanding some more, I attempted my first ever mold. I used glossy signboard from Office Depot to build the flanges, yellow filleting wax for the seams, and painter's tape and popsicle sticks to support the whole thing, while I applied white gel coat and a polyurethane resin with fiberglass. I definitely should have thrown this mold in the trash, but I decided to try and take a part from it anyway. Looking back, this part of the video makes me cringe every time. Not a structurally sound piece, that's for sure. Oh. Hey, we did it. Okay, so obviously not going to work. This part came out very disfigured, too thin, and was just wasted material. There were some important lessons here, the most important being that sometimes you just have to soldier on and complete something, even if you know it's not going to work. I think that any car person who's spent dozens of hours staring at the small parts of a project will understand this. Yes, details are important, but if you keep chasing the microscopic, you'll never understand the project for what it's meant to be. That is, a whole complete item you can enjoy. This is a lesson I would promptly forget for the next 2 years. Creating the original mold in the process of demolding had damaged the plug, so some building and sanding was required to get it back into the proper shape. What I'm sanding here is the rebuilt clay and fiberglass plug that you saw earlier. At this time, I also decided that I would combine this piece with the upper portion and create a single large plug that I would then replicate as a mold. I know this was moving the goalposts a bit, as the new shape would contain negative space that would make the molding process, and more specifically the demolding process, that much harder. This is because the mold would bind against the part inside of it once it's cured. I was fairly confident that I would be able to build the break lines along the part edges to make something that would demold cleanly. I attempt to explain this in the second video, but it's not very clear what I'm doing, so I believe the result will speak for itself later in this video. Combining the two parts required that they somehow be secured together. I used stock mounting screws on the spoiler and threaded them through a hole in the lower portion. Then I added a layer of chop strand matte fiberglass, which I thought with resin would glue the two pieces together firmly. I used body filler, 3M glazing putty, and some knockoff Eastwood gray epoxy primer to finish the part to a reasonable shine that I felt would translate into the mold. At this point, I got to take a look at what the final product would begin to look like. A small win, but there was still a long road ahead. For those following along at home, I did successfully use a can of expanding foam to get a precise fit on the attachment point of the wing. Originally, I had sculpted the attachment points out of clay, but could never get the fit precisely right. Additionally, I laid 5mm sheet wax on the surface of the car to elevate the tips of the feet from the car's surface. This stuff was really awesome. It was very stable, it adhered to the car, and didn't adhere to the fiberglass resin. If you're looking to precisely follow curves on a panel, but spaced away from it, I can seriously recommend this stuff. So now we have to talk about mold building. There are definitely better resources out there than what I can offer you, but just know that this part is potentially the most expensive and the most frustrating. Certain manufacturers offer mold making kits, and they come in varying degrees of quality. Some might argue that getting started with cheaper materials is a good way to minimize cost, but the amount of error that can occur simply because you had bad materials is surprising. Specifically, I'm talking about polyester resin, epoxy resin, and gel coat. For the initial shape, where I encased the clay model in a layer of fiberglass, I used Bondo poly resin from Home Depot. The problem with polyester resin is that it has a shelf life, and when you buy from Home Depot or other retail store, you don't necessarily know how long that product has been sitting in warehouses and transportation. By the time you get it, it's usually brown and has an unpleasant smell. By contrast, when I received my shipment of polyester resin from Fiberglass, a specialist company that focuses on high quality material, the resin was almost clear and had very little odor. It behaved predictably and did not get goopy prematurely. Something you also have to consider with polyester resin is using laminating resin versus finishing or waxed resin. What you buy at a retail store is most likely waxed resin. This resin contains wax that allows it to fully cure in the presence of air, so it can be painted or sanded. Laminating resin, or unwaxed resin, will not fully cure and will remain tacky, allowing you to add more layers to it. In other words, laminate it. The final layer of laminating resin can be cured by separating it from air. Short of shooting your piece into outer space, applying a layer of PVA, or polyvinyl alcohol, will work just as well. Remember, PVA, not EVA. In summary, use the cheap stuff or whatever is at your local retail store for the plug. This will allow you to get used to resins and cure times and help you understand the application process. Something frustrating about the cheaper options is that they're generally not precise about mix ratios and temperature variations. That's right, it gets more complicated. But before getting into all that, we're going to make the flange. Here I begin with a large sheet of construction paper. This comes in rolls at retail hardware stores and is used to cover floors temporarily so that workers' boots don't damage flooring inside finished spaces. After tracing around the edges of the plug to get the rough shape of the flanges I wanted, I translate that shape to aluminum for the final flange. Using hot glue, which would turn out to be a real pain later, I attach the flanges and adjust using a heat gun. Okay, so I learned a lot doing this. This is pretty gross to do. Really hot glue pulled up the paint pretty easily. But really the trick was trying to get kind of some level of 90 or 45 degree off of this so that I don't have like a mechanically locked piece. Probably gonna have to split this one down the middle so that I can take it off like this. Other side came out alright. This is more kind of like what I wanted here, where it's the flange comes off this way, follows this path pretty nicely, so that side's not bad too. But. Okay, so these are the primary flanges done. They look pretty messy because I have no idea what I'm doing. Alright, it's time. Now I'm going to move to gel coat. Well, sorry, first I'm going to do the green spray PVE, polyvinyl PVA. There is one other important step here that I overlook, and that's that you have to wax the part using mold release wax before you apply the PVA. The can of it is even right there under my hand. I get a lot better at this as I continue to make these mold pieces. Polyvinyl alcohol. Do a couple coats of that. I sprayed it on last time. I might just brush it this time. I don't know. I'm gonna do something with it. Okay, this is not working for me. And I'm gonna go buy a cheap spray gun, Harbor Freight. All right, Harbor Freight coming to save the day. To get the PVA right took me 4 tries. Okay, so despite me being incredibly stupid and using nearly half of a PVA, or more than half a PVA I had left, I did figure out how to use a spray gun. So, with the first flange ready to go, I went ahead and layered gel coat, 2 layers of 10-ounce fiberglass fabric at 45 degrees, then a final layer of 20-ounce tooling fabric, and this was the result. It's pretty ugly. Look at that, the wrinkling down here. Anyway, I'm gonna take what we learned and hopefully do better on the next half. Which this time you guys will get to watch, so yeah, we'll keep trying. Oh my god. Oh, no. I don't know if you guys can see how textured this whole thing is. All that work, man. Oh man. Supposedly even professionals struggle with this kind of thing. I definitely did something wrong in my gel coat. It was not my intention to take this off this soon because I wanted the gel coat to be fully cured, but given the alligatoring that we've seen on the edges, I'm pretty confident this is not going to be any good anymore. Although I've been wrong in the past. But yeah, you've got a little alligator in here, and here, and up here. But otherwise, I mean, it's pretty cool, but look at how crazy this is. Like, this is, I mean, definitely not what we want. Like, this is what we wanted, and I don't know why we didn't get this. As it turns out, if you're not extremely careful on how you mix and lay your gel coat, this will happen no matter what. The most important things to get right are: A, make sure your gel coat to catalyst ratio is spot on. B, thoroughly mix for 2 full minutes. Seriously, count out 2 minutes every time. C, start with a thin layer and allow that to cure for at least an hour at 72 degrees. If it's colder, wait longer. And if it's less than 60 degrees where you're working, you probably shouldn't try to lay gel coat at all. D, apply a second thicker layer of gel coat and allow that to partially cure for the same amount of time, and then follow this with your fiberglass cloth and polyester resin. I'm using laminating tooling resin specific to this application, and it's unwaxed, so it requires a sprayed or brushed on layer of PVA after setting to fully cure. So this time I got smart and tested out the sprayer on pieces of board before attempting to apply it to the part. I was looking for a fast and fine mist that coated evenly. Once I had a spray pattern that I felt good about, I went ahead and sprayed the part. Every time I would use PVA, I followed this process and I had much better results, and I did not waste nearly as much PVA.
Alright, this time much more like thick spaghetti sauce. The fixotropic properties this time around were a lot more advanced. Fixotropic means how well it sticks to like a vertical surface. And this, I mean, you can see I was swiping sideways here and there's no sag whatsoever. So I think proper mixing, proper ratio really was the way to go here. So hopefully the results are good. It felt really good putting on. It was very, very thick. A lot more gel-like, so I guess that would imply gel coat. Okay, it's been just over an hour now. No sign of alligatoring. It's not very tacky still to the touch, so I think an hour was probably good enough. I'm gonna go ahead and mix up a second batch. Alright, so this one is a significant improvement over the last one. We got such a nice smooth finish everywhere, for the most part, except for right here where this huge alligator appeared right in the part. Don't know why that happened, but it did.
My suspicion in hindsight about this particular alligator. By the way, they're called that because they look like rinky alligator skin, in case you didn't know. But, as I was saying, for this particular alligator, I believe it was caused by slightly too thick of application of gel coat along the brush stroke lines in the second gel coat layer. This is because gel coat shrinks as it cures, and if it shrinks too quickly, it will cause wrinkling and can distort layers beneath it. I repaired these alligators in the mold later on. From here, I think you get the process. The challenge now is building a mold that won't mechanically lock against itself when I go to produce the part. As I go through the next steps, I will address this concern by producing a mold with 5 separate pieces. Yes, 5, and that's before we even touch any carbon fiber.
Alright, so given what using hot glue on this plug did to the mold, or did to the plug, I've decided that before I proceed with further molding, I'm going to refinish the edges that were damaged. Basically, we are at the phase now where
taking the second layer of the mold, which you probably know because to you there's only been, you know, seconds since you saw me work on that, but I assure you it's been a little longer than that. So now I am moving on to making the flange for the lower half of the mold. Decided to switch back to the signboard mainly because I have it, and for this piece I feel like it will be plenty appropriate to not scratching the edges. It will lay in here like this. Alright guys, so I've been jumping around with this for a while, getting this flange kind of in the center of this mold somewhere, or this plug somewhere, that using my trusty angle here, or square, doesn't create any greater than or less than 90-degree angle all along the edge of this flange here, so that I can make sure that this doesn't mechanically lock if I take this all as one piece. So the idea here is that if I have a mold that's in the shape of a box, if there's perfect 90-degree angles between the faces and then they're connected, they won't come apart, they won't slide off the piece. What you need is slightly greater than 90 degrees so that they're open and won't become mechanically locked. So if you imagine that I have this mold that's in this shape here, just this is a great illustration of it, and it's inside a plug that's this shape, it can pull out of that shape because it won't get mechanically locked. Likewise, side to side, it's open from here. So there'll be the top flanges here, which I don't have on right now because I thought it would be too hard to demonstrate kind of what I'm talking about. But two flanges, there'll be a flange here, and then a flange on the back, and then likewise flange here because we've already created these two parts of the mold. And then I'm going to create another flange here. So this is going to be one flange, so to speak. This separates the front from the back. So the plan is top two, then front, and then back are two, and then the bottom is one or two, depending on what it looks like when we're done. The only place I have any concern is here, inside this pocket, because the spoiler comes down kind of into a convex shape here relative to the other side. I'm hoping that this piece is big enough that there'll be enough flex in the mold that it won't matter too much. I'll be able to kind of just pop it off. As you guys can probably tell by this shape, if you know anything about gravity, this mold isn't doing a very good job of staying on the plug. So now I'm going to put that flange back in here. I'm going to use clay to seal up the back side of it instead of hot glue. I was not very impressed with hot glue. I'm going to use clay and then filleting wax around the edges to fill any gaps. I will be laying this flange here. There's a flange that's got to go along this edge, and I may reuse the aluminum one I'd already built for it, or I may build a new one out of the signboard. And then I will have a space here that I will try and lay all as one piece, and I think that that will be successful.
it's not the hot glue again. Alright guys, we're there, we're ready to go. We've got pretty clean edge all the way around here. So now we're gonna go for the PVA, a couple layers of that, and go for the gel coat. Alright, despite the exciting failure of my Harbor Freight spray gun, it actually laid really, really nice. Alright, so for the next phase of this, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different than what I did before. The 20 gram or 20 ounce tooling fabric, while it creates a really, really nice finish, is kind of expensive. I think it's about double the price of chop strand. So I'm going to still be using my a 38-inch 3-yard package of the 10 ounce as my surface that goes on top of the gel coat. That turned out really nice. So I'll do this and follow with a layer of chop strand. This is 1.5 ounce chop strand mat, and then the final layer will be the tooling fabric. We're gonna hopefully get similar strength with cutting, I mean, 1/6 of the cost out, so 15% reduction in cost, which isn't crazy, but you know, it's something for a project this size, especially if I screw it up and have to do it again. Alright, here's the first layer. I'm gonna go ahead and goo it up now. Alright, I'm gonna say it. I'm not sure the money you save by using chop strand instead of the 20 gram or 20 ounce mat is worth it. Used a lot of resin, and the chop strand does not lay as nicely, nearly as nicely. A lot more air bubbles, a lot more crumpling, like just not ideal as the layer to follow the 10 ounce. So we'll see how it turns out. I don't think it will really cause any issues. It's just cosmetic from the mold side of things, which is kind of a silly thing to be concerned about. But yeah, so it went okay. It's just a lot of resin, probably twice as much. cool. That was very satisfying. Now you can kind of see what we're gonna do. So now I'm gonna clean it up, put it back in the mold, or put it back inside the plug, and then we're gonna do this same thing that way. There is unfortunately this crack that's appeared here, so I can't really push it back together and hold it there. So the move here is going to be to just fill it with some wax, and the final product will be off by, you know, 1/16 of an inch or whatever. Alright, so I've now sealed up all the edges here with some clay. This is the flange design that I've opted for, so I've decided to come straight up off the bottom, and then it curves, it comes up at a, you know, roughly 90 degree, and then merges into the rest of the mold going up. And what this will allow is that on the other side I'm going to have, you know, a nice easy layup. Basically I'm going to take the entire mold and flip it upside down with the plug in it to do this last one, and I should have a fairly easy layup in there. So yep, more popsicle sticks. To support this properly I had to screw some pieces of wood into my sawhorses. It's starting to get more complex to support this thing. The tape here is actually, these are straps. I have a third strap over there, and what they're doing is they're pulling the top, particularly this right side of the mold, in against the plug. There was a little bit of gap there, and I think it's caused by the distortion in the piece, since there was that break that took place here where we have the crack that's filled now. It caused there to be a bit of a gap up here at the top, so I've rectified that by tensioning it down with 2 pieces of tape that wrap all the way around, and same thing down here, pulling that into it against it. So the final piece will be slightly distorted, but I don't think it'll be visible. We have a problem here. The gel coat underneath this has completely separated from the plug. I don't know why. The vast majority of this piece is good. Just for some reason this section right here and a little bit of this section has completely failed. And what really concerns me is that I can see the plug through the resin. This dark bit here is the plug, which means that the gel coat just, I don't know what it did. So I am going to take a risk, and this is still wet. I'm gonna cut out all of this corner that's no good and clean it up with some acetone, hopefully get everything off it that's still wet, and go for a layer of gel coat and follow with another layer of fiberglass. I guess this time I will do 1 coat of gel coat to 25-ish mils, and then I will leave it overnight before I put any more material on here. very critical gel coat failure. And the worst of it is right here. And now the problem is that I've got to remove the epoxy resin with acetone, but the surface, the painted surface of the plug itself is also vulnerable to acetone and is now cracking as I apply acetone because it attempts to dissolve the acrylic paint underneath the hard epoxy. This was my most critical failure to date.
At this point, you might be wondering, why am I doing this to myself? I mean, in the process of editing this, it's crossed my mind a dozen or so times. But if you've made it this far into what is becoming a feature-length film of failure, then I guess you understand what it means not to give up, and I appreciate you coming along on this journey with me. Reviewing these videos after such a long time really has been an odd adventure for me in and of itself. First off, you're getting the distilled version, but for every second, I have hours of footage of me talking and grinding. Really, what was I thinking? I could have spent a couple $100 on a spoiler and then been done with it. I mean, here I was only a year ago sweating, inhaling volatile chemical fumes with no end in sight just to put a stupid wing on my bone stock car. Was it worth it? Not for the wing, no, but for the experience, absolutely. And I felt that way even then. The very next day, I'm up on it and ready to start again.
This next day, I think this is gonna work out.
One day later.
I don't know why this is so effing hard. People on YouTube make this stuff look easy. Not easy.
From here, I'm going to speed things up. You already know what it takes to make the mold parts, and really the whole thing is more art than science, maybe with a bit of witchcraft mixed in. So if you're trying to figure this stuff out, you'll just have to get out there and lay some resin. For those of you who are new to the channel, while I was working on this, I was fortunate to come across a few friends who were looking to get out of the JDM import car business. I hopped on it, and besides gaining 9 more garage spaces and 7 more cars, I got a dedicated space to work on the rest of the spoiler. This will be the last flange that goes on here. I'll be laying fiberglass on here to take a mold of the bottom, and that will be the last piece of this mold. However, this is the last time you will see me work on this project here in this garage, because in addition to getting 7 Japanese vehicles, I've also got the liberty of working here. I got a warehouse. I got a warehouse. It's been another 3 months or so. I've been duly preoccupied with a number of other things going on. This has been a very, very long road, and I'm very excited to actually end this. So we have a problem. The gel coat lid totally stuck. So I know this is the last of the gel coat, and this is the last thing I'm putting gel coat on. So I'm just going to pierce it, and we're going to use it all. Guys, always wear eye protection. There we go. The blood of my victims. So you guys probably remember, because for you it was only a couple minutes ago, but what color the polyester resin was when I originally was using it, that kind of milky white, almost opalescent, and it would change color when you put the MEKP in. This is what it looks like now. Has hardly any odor to it. We're gonna use it anyway.
we go. Yeah, it took a lot of that gel coat with it, but how about that? A little bit of alligatoring here. We did it. Okay, today we are unpacking this mold. So we're going to take out all of the pieces like so, and then we're going to arrange them so we can lay up carbon fiber in them. And then we're going to clean these up and treat them so that carbon fiber won't stick to them when we take them apart. So for some reason the lav mic keeps dying, so I flipped over to my backup mic, so sorry for background noise. This whole thing is sealed to the other one, but there is quite a bit of, I don't think this is mechanical lock on this side. I do believe that this is this giant flat piece of resin attached to that other flat piece of resin. So I'm thinking I might have to hit it with a hammer, which I don't have. All you have is a drill, everything looks like a hammer. Conveniently, I happen to have this hole saw. Thinking if I drill a big hole in the middle, use a screwdriver around that, I can pop it, relieve the pressure. So I think it's starting to go. I've wedged these two screwdrivers going in opposite directions in the middle here. Now I'm just going to go ahead and pull, and hopefully it pops right off. Need more screwdrivers. You could. Whoa. Oh. Oh. Wow. Yeah, it was just vacuum. And once I broke the vacuum going this way, I saw this bubble of air go like this, and it just went. All right, this time this is seeing the light of day. There she is. Okay, no mechanical lock. Should come straight out. So this is it. My spoiler has been converted. Next up, our very favorite activity, more sanding. I'm going to go ahead and start with 1000 grit. We're just going to clean off all the imperfections, all of the paint that transferred from the plug onto these molds. Then we will wipe all of these down or rinse them off with a hose or something to get all of the old PVA off, and that will allow us to have a clean slate to lay a new coat of PVA. But before we do that, we'll fill all the alligators and whatnot with wax. Alright, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I'm doing here. Basically, I'm identifying anywhere in the gel coat that there's a really, really bad error, and particularly a negative error. So I've already taken care of all of the positive errors, which were pieces of paint and stuff like that that were on there. Now, all I'm trying to do is fill these with filleting wax that to the point that they will not cause a distortion in the weave. That is the most important thing that we're focusing on at this point. The whole goal is to minimize the imperfections that we get in the final piece, and where we are going to have imperfections, that they be positive on that piece so that they're raised off of the surface so that we can sand them down without touching the coating around it. And then when we do a final polish coat on the epoxy before it goes to clear coat, we'll have a nice finish underneath the clear coat. Okay, so we've got the mold set up here, and we're going to, it's been coated with PVA, laid out actually pretty nicely. We're going to seal up these seams with wax. Same thing right here. I'm going to seal up the seam here. I've positioned it in this way so that the carbon fiber will drape but not hang, and so carbon fiber will drape here, which means it should fall in place right along this, which should be fine. Same thing on here. This is sloped slightly this way so that it's not hanging this way, which will cause it to fall that way. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay up resin, the epoxy resin, on here and let it partially cure. Not really partially cure, but give it, you know, a good, like, I don't know, 15 minutes or so before laying the carbon fiber very carefully against it so that it'll tack.
So finally, the moment we've all been waiting for, laying carbon fiber. I'm using 2x2 twill weave carbon and plan on doing 3 layers. The first layer, which is the portion visible from the outside, will be laid in after a layer of epoxy resin. The second and third layers will consist of scraps from cutting the first layer, laid in with the weaves at 45 degrees to the previous layer. This way, the final shape will not flex in any direction. So now we're back to the whole resin thing again. Epoxy resin is different from polyester resin in a few ways. First, it has a much longer shelf life. Unlike polyester resin, epoxy resin can remain viable after long periods of storage. This is good because most of the epoxy I bought for this project had been sitting for a couple of years by now. If you're using old material, it's still always good to test them out to ensure that it's still usable. Second, epoxy is more compatible with carbon fiber. Cured epoxy is stronger than polyester by weight, and wet epoxy is better able to stick to individual carbon fibers. Using polyester resin with carbon is risky, and the resin may slide off the fibers instead of sticking and saturating the material. Third, epoxy resin can have different working times and cure times by using different catalyst mixtures. These catalyst mixtures come pre-prepared with specific ratio instructions and allow for a wide range of working times. The epoxy I'm using here has a 60-minute working time before it begins to tack. This gives me plenty of time to work the layers into exact positions that I need for so large a layup. For smaller projects, 20 or 40-minute preparations are available. Finally, something to note is that raw epoxy surfaces must be coated with a UV-resistant treatment or they will yellow over time due to sunlight exposure. You can lay clear gel coat directly into the mold prior to the epoxy and carbon, though this is an advanced technique and is probably best done with access to spray equipment that can handle gel coat. The clear gel coat will make up the finished surface and protect the underlying epoxy from UV damage. Alternatively, you can apply clear coat to the final carbon piece. This may be easier for home builders since a shop with the right equipment can easily spray clear and get a really nice finish. However, the cumulative mistakes in the mold making process and potentially the entire mold design in and of itself will come back to haunt me, and how to protect the carbon will become the least of my concerns.
I'm going to take these 2 side pieces off and then I'll take the back piece off. Not hiding anything here. This tip turned out really good. I'm really happy with that. I'm really happy with the front edge. This actually looks really nice. Again, obviously it's kind of opaque and stuff. This is just how it came out of the mold. The problem happens here on the back. This is where the issues begin. We have exposed carbon here where for whatever reason the resin didn't get there. I have this issue all along the back, but that's pretty disheartening to see. Alright, we're back. This piece is looking really good. It's still kind of tacky on the back, but at this point I don't think it's ever going to dry, so we're not going to worry about it. I am going to try and release this from the mold. I am thinking that it is going to be very difficult to do that without cutting, and so our mold may be taking some hits here. However, this piece does look a lot better than the last one. So, yeah, we're going to go ahead and start getting it out.
that's one side. Clearly bubbles and stuff, but it looks a lot better than the last one I did. I'm really excited to see this part because this is the part that I designed, obviously, so. Yeah, this is pretty damn cool to see. I mean, the same problem as the other one where the resin didn't stick in the upward facing parts, just wouldn't stick to the mold. But yeah, obviously this shape would be better suited to like a vacuum bag. I'm gonna cut it out, free it from its prison, and we'll see if it lines up with the other side. And then we gotta figure out how to put these things together. Back here, this is the biggest gap that needs to be closed. I think I need to trim some off of this so that it'll fit into there. Same thing underneath here. But otherwise, pretty good. Looks really good along here. We've got almost like a perfect match, or, you know, following the line pretty closely. This obviously needs to be tucked in a little more. Probably do some trimming down there. And then along the front as well. Obviously right here needs to be trimmed, but... All right, and we're done. That's a carbon fiber spoiler. Okay, obviously not. So unfortunately this project was a bit ambitious for not only a beginner, but a hand layup part. In composite part making, composite refers to something made of resin and weave material, and there are two primary options for taking a part from a mold when you're building a composite. You can do exactly what you've watched me do for the last hour, which is called a hand layup. By hand, you lay fabric in resin and hope it dries in the shape that you want. This is totally acceptable for small, uncomplicated pieces. Even large pieces can be done this way as long as they aren't complicated, like the hood of a car, which is basically a big flat sheet. However, for more complex shapes, you can use vacuum bagging. This requires special equipment, including bags, a vacuum pump, and a curing oven. For small parts, a conventional oven can be used, but something large, you need to buy or construct a dedicated curing oven. Given time and effort I went through, I probably should have gone for this second method and potentially rented time from someone with an autoclave to finish the part. Vacuum bagging ensures that the fabric and resin fit into every crevice of the mold because all the air is sucked out of the part, leaving only resin and fabric. This would have prevented the air bubbles that you see in my part, especially around the edges. But as you've already seen, I do manage to finish this spoiler and put it on the car, and since the car is wrapped and it was my intention to wrap the spoiler, this part was going to have to be painted or at least primed. So the simplest solution was to bodywork the part. But before we get there, I have to find a way to combine the pieces. Even still, I have absolutely no idea what the correct way to approach this is. I just ended up taking loose carbon fiber and using resin to secure the inside of the part, and then fold it, and then resin the other half to create a kind of carbon fiber bridge between the two halves. This would never work for a final carbon-only part, as the seam would be obvious, but since we're going to have to sand, build, and prime the part anyway, this is what I did. It's one piece, it's not rattling, it's cracking, but, you know, just very little flex in it. We're here with the spoiler. It's in one piece that now needs to be sanded all the way down, get all the low spots, and then we're going to do body filler and get this looking like it's supposed to look. I think it's going to be a little bit of a long road. So now you've seen the whole bit, beginning to end. The biggest win for me is that I can move on to other things. I started this project when I knew next to nothing about cars. It might surprise my viewers to know that I wasn't one of those kids who had posters of cars on his wall or even wanted to drive for most of my life. It wasn't until I took the most embarrassing test drive of my life, only 6 years ago, that I fell in love with cars and car culture. That test drive was in this BRZ. As I've become more ensconced in car culture, specifically JDM culture, it fills me with a certain joy that I was inspired by a car like the 86 BRZ platform. I seriously had no idea about any of the history or intent behind the car. I didn't even know about the memes, that it was slow or that every owner of one just slaps wheels, a wrap, and a wing on it, but never actually modifies the engine. It's one of the latest in a legacy of the pursuit of the joy of driving, a product created intentionally to inspire a generation, and if anyone is living proof of the power behind that intention to inspire, it is me. I went from owning a single beat-up Chevy S10 because it was cheap and utilitarian, to owning a swath of interesting Japanese cars, all because of one little machine. And now, I leave you with something hopefully to keep you coming back and join me in the future. Almost a manifest fulfillment of the journey I've begun on the shoulders of giants. I never expected to own this next car. It's not even a Japanese import. It just kind of happened. The next day, we're already moving on to the next project. I bought another Japanese.